The shelter called about his dead son's pets. His answer shocked them. The house felt larger than it was, or perhaps, Walter thought, he had simply become smaller. He shuffled through the hallway, his slippers whispering on the polished wooden floor, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. Sunlight, weak and watery from the late autumn sky, streamed through the lace-curtained windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It had been 3 years since Michael, since the accident. 3 years since the laughter, the arguments, the life had been abruptly ripped from these rooms, leaving behind only a hollow shell. The house in suburban Maryland, a comfortable 2-story colonial with a faded red brick facade, had been a vibrant, bustling place once. Walter, a retired history professor, had filled it with books, maps, and the quiet hum of academic life. Michael, his only child, had countered that quietude with the energy of youth. The thud of basketballs on the driveway, the strumming of a guitar from his bedroom, the boisterous shouts of friends gathered around the worn kitchen table. Now, the basketball hoop rusted in the backyard, the guitar lay silent in its case, and the kitchen table was covered in a thick layer of dust, a testament to meals uneaten, conversations unheard. Walter reached the kitchen, the heart of the house, now cold and sterile. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the countertop, his fingers tracing the outline of a faint stain, a coffee ring probably, from one of Michael's rushed breakfasts before school. He could almost see him, a lanky teenager with a mop of unruly brown hair, wolfing down toast and simultaneously trying to finish his homework. The memory, sharp and bittersweet, brought a familiar ache to his chest. He turned on the kettle, the electric hum a jarring intrusion into the quiet. He made tea, Earl Grey, the same blend he'd been drinking for decades. He sat at the small kitchen table, the one they used for everyday meals, and stared out the window at the overgrown garden. Michael had always promised to help him tame it, to plant tomatoes and roses, but time had run out. The ringing of the telephone sliced through the stillness, making him jump. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the receiver. He rarely received calls anymore. Most of his friends had either passed away or drifted off, sensing, perhaps, the impenetrable wall of grief he had erected around himself. It was probably a telemarketer, he thought, or a wrong number. He picked it up anyway, his voice raspy from disuse. "Hello? Mr. Walter Peterson," a woman's voice asked, brisk and professional. "Speaking." "Mr. Peterson, my name is Sarah Miller. I'm calling from Bethesda General Hospital. We have some information regarding your son, Michael Peterson." Walter's breath hitched. His hand tightened around the receiver. Any mention of Michael, even after all this time, felt like a fresh wound. What is it? Before the accident, Mr. Peterson, your son had initiated the adoption process for a cat and a dog at the Montgomery County Animal Shelter. He had completed the paperwork and paid the fees, but he hadn't yet collected them. Walter frowned, confused. Michael hadn't mentioned anything about adopting pets. He'd always loved animals, especially when he was younger. I don't understand." The cat, a young male ginger, and the dog, a female mixed breed, a little bit terrier, were being held at a partner veterinary clinic waiting for your son to pick them up. After the incident, the shelter attempted to contact next of kin, but the information was outdated. The cat is still at the clinic, Dr. Evans' office on Elm Street. The dog is there too. We thought you should be aware. Walter was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Michael, his impulsive, kind-hearted Michael, had wanted to adopt a cat and a dog. And now they were waiting, abandoned, a loose end in a life tragically cut short. I don't know what to say, Walter finally managed, his voice trembling. I can't take care of a cat and a dog. I'm not well. We understand, Mr. Peterson, the woman said, her voice softening slightly. It's entirely your decision. We just wanted to inform you of the situation. The clinic is aware that you might be contacting them. There's no pressure. Thank you, Walter said weakly. Thank you for letting me know. He hung up the phone, his hand shaking. He sat there, staring at the receiver, the woman's words echoing in his mind. A cat and a dog, Michael's cat and Michael's dog. Another piece of his son's life, a life he could no longer touch, no longer share. He felt a familiar wave of grief wash over him, cold and relentless. He couldn't do it. He couldn't face another reminder of what he had lost. He would call the clinic, tell them to find someone else, someone who could give them the home they deserved. He rose from the table, his joints stiff and aching, and walked back into the living room. He sank onto the worn armchair, the one Michael used to sprawl in while watching movies, and closed his eyes. The empty house pressed in on him, heavy with silence, heavy with loss. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. And the thought of bringing two animals, two living, breathing creatures that needed care and attention, into this desolate space was simply unbearable. It was too much. It was far, far too much. The nights were the worst. During the day, Walter could distract himself with small, meaningless tasks, sorting through old papers, attempting to read, watching the news with the volume turned low. But at night, when the darkness crept in and the house settled into an even deeper silence, the memories came. They flooded his mind, vivid and relentless, playing out like scenes from a film he couldn't stop watching. He saw Michael as a toddler, his chubby legs pumping furiously as he chased after a bright red ball in the backyard. He saw him as a schoolboy, his face screwed up in concentration as he struggled with a math problem. He saw him as a teenager, his eyes shining with excitement as he showed off his first awful, in Walter's opinion, attempt at songwriting. And then the final image, the one that haunted him most, the phone call, the sterile voice of the police officer, the words that shattered his world. Accident. Critical condition. We're so sorry. He tossed and turned in the large empty bed, the sheets tangled around his legs. Sleep was a fickle friend, offering only brief, restless interludes before abandoning him to the torment of his thoughts. He thought about the cat and the dog. He imagined them, small and vulnerable, waiting in cages, confused and alone. He pictured Michael's face, his kind eyes, his gentle smile. He knew, deep down, that Michael would have wanted him to take care of them, but the fear was a physical thing, a knot in his stomach, a tightness in his chest. He was afraid of the responsibility, of the disruption to his carefully constructed routine of grief. He was afraid of the pain, of the constant reminder of his loss that these animals would represent. He was, quite simply, afraid of feeling anything at all. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of sleepless nights and weary days. He ate little, spoke to no one, and avoided leaving the house. The phone call from the hospital had been a week ago, and he still hadn't contacted the veterinary clinic. He knew he had to make a decision, but he kept putting it off, paralyzed by indecision and grief. One morning, he woke to the sound of rain lashing against the windows. The sky was a dull, oppressive gray, mirroring his mood. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic drumming of the rain. He thought about the cat, the ginger one, and the dog. He wondered what they looked like, what their personalities were like. He imagined Michael kneeling down, stroking their fur, talking to them in his soft, reassuring voice. A sudden, sharp pang of guilt pierced through his apathy. He was failing Michael. He was letting his grief consume him, blinding him to the needs of these innocent creatures. He was letting Michael's last act of kindness be met with indifference. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. He couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't hide from the world, from the pain, from the memory of his son. He had to at least see them. He got dressed slowly, his movements stiff and deliberate. He made a cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out the window at the rain, still falling steadily. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He would go to the clinic. He would see the cat and the dog. And then he would decide. He drove slowly, his old Volvo navigating the slick streets with a familiar rumble. The veterinary clinic was located in a small shopping center, nestled between a dry cleaner and a bakery. He parked the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He sat there for a moment, gathering his courage. He walked into the clinic, the scent of antiseptic and animal fur filling his nostrils. A young woman with bright pink hair and a friendly smile greeted him from behind the reception desk. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Walter said, his voice hoarse. "I'm Walter Peterson. I believe you have a cat and a dog that belong to my son, Michael Peterson." The woman's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of sympathy. "Yes, Mr. Peterson, we've been expecting you. Dr. Evans will be with you in a moment. Please have a seat." Walter sat down in one of the plastic chairs in the waiting area, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around the room, at the posters of various dog and cat breeds, at the brochures advertising pet food and vaccinations. He felt a sense of unreality, as if he were stepping into a world he no longer belonged to. A few minutes later, a door opened and a man in a white coat emerged. He was tall and slender, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "I'm Dr. Evans. Please come in." Walter followed him into a small examination room. The room was clean and brightly lit, with a stainless steel examination table in the center, and in the corner, in two separate spacious cages, were the cat and the dog. The cat was, indeed, Ginger, a beautiful, vibrant orange with white paws and a white patch on its chest. It was curled up in a ball, its eyes closed, seemingly asleep. The dog, on the other hand, a female with a coat of brown and white. She looked at him with bright, curious eyes. She didn't bark or whine, just stared. Walter felt a lump form in his throat. He walked slowly towards the cages, his legs feeling heavy and unsteady. He stopped in front of the cat's cage, his eyes fixed on the small, furry creature. It was beautiful, delicate, and utterly vulnerable, and it had belonged to Michael. He had a name tag around its neck with the name Sonny. He reached out a trembling hand and gently stroked the cat's fur. It stirred slightly, opening its eyes. They were a striking shade of green, clear and bright. The cat looked at him, a silent, questioning gaze. Walter felt a tear roll down his cheek. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He was overwhelmed by a wave of emotion, grief, love, regret, and a faint, flickering ember of something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or perhaps simply connection. He looked at the dog, Shadow, and felt the same. He knew, in that moment, that he couldn't leave them. He couldn't abandon them. They were Michael's legacy, a tangible link to the son he had lost, and he would take care of them, not just for Michael, but for himself. He had a long road ahead of him, he knew, but he was no longer alone. He had Sonny and Shadow, and in a way, he had Michael too. The drive home was a blur. Walter had signed the necessary paperwork, listened to Dr. Evans' instructions on feeding and care, and loaded the cat carrier and the dog, surprisingly calm, into his car. He felt a strange mix of emotions, anxiety, anticipation, and a growing sense of responsibility. He hadn't cared for a pet since Michael was a small boy, and they had briefly owned a goldfish, which had met an untimely end due to an overzealous feeding schedule. He pulled into his driveway, the house looming before him, no longer just a symbol of loss, but now, potentially, a home again. He parked the car and sat for a moment, taking a deep breath. He looked in the rearview mirror at Shadow, who was panting softly, her tongue lolling out. He glanced at the cat carrier, where Sonny was curled up, seemingly unfazed by the journey. "Well," he said aloud, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, "here we are." He carried the cat carrier into the house first, placing it gently on the floor in the living room. He opened the door, and Sonny peered out, his green eyes wide and cautious. He took a tentative step out, then another, sniffing the air, his tail twitching nervously. Walter watched him, holding his breath. He didn't want to frighten him. He remembered what Dr. Evans had said. Give them time to adjust. Let them explore at their own pace. Don't force interaction. He went back to the car and got Shadow, clipping a leash onto her collar. She was surprisingly well behaved, walking calmly beside him as he led her into the house. Sonny, who had been exploring the coffee table, froze when he saw the dog. He arched his back, his fur bristling, and let out a low hiss. Shadow in turn stopped in her tracks, her ears perked up, her body tense. She didn't bark, but she whined softly, her tail wagging hesitantly. "Easy now," Walter said, his voice soothing. "Easy, both of you. You're going to be friends. You're going to be family." He kept Shadow on the leash, allowing her to sniff around the room, but keeping a safe distance from Sonny. He knew it would take time for them to get used to each other, to establish their own hierarchy and boundaries. He had read about introducing cats and dogs, about the importance of gradual acclimation, of providing separate spaces and resources. He had prepared for their arrival as best he could. He had bought cat food and dog food, bowls, litter boxes, toys, and even a couple of comfortable beds. He had set up one litter box in the spare bathroom and another in the laundry room. He had placed the food and water bowls in separate corners of the kitchen. He had cleared a space on the living room floor for the pet beds. The first few days were a mixture of chaos and quiet observation. Sonny spent most of his time hiding under furniture, venturing out only when he thought no one was watching. Shadow, on the other hand, was more curious and outgoing, exploring every nook and cranny of the house, her tail wagging constantly. Walter watched them, learning their habits, their preferences, their individual quirks. Sonny, he discovered, was a creature of comfort, preferring soft surfaces and warm spots. He loved to curl up on the armchair, the one Michael used to favor. Shadow, on the other hand, was more energetic, always ready for a walk or a game of fetch. She loved to chase squirrels in the backyard, her barks echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Walter found himself talking to them, telling them about Michael, about his life, about his grief. He knew they couldn't understand his words, but it felt comforting somehow to have someone to talk to, even if it was just a cat and a dog. He struggled with the practicalities of pet ownership. He had to learn how to scoop litter boxes, how to groom Shadow's fur, how to clip their nails, a task he dreaded. He made mistakes, spilled food, tripped over toys, and once accidentally locked Sonny in the bathroom for an hour, an incident that left him feeling deeply ashamed and Sonny even more skittish. But slowly, gradually, things began to settle down. Sonny started to come out of his shell, venturing out from under the furniture more often, even allowing Walter to stroke his fur without flinching. Shadow, in turn, learned to be more gentle around the cat, her initial excitement giving way to a cautious respect. One evening, Walter was sitting in the armchair reading a book when he felt a soft weight on his lap. He looked down and saw Sonny curled up in a ball, purring softly. He reached out a hand and gently stroked his fur, feeling the warmth of his small body, the rhythmic vibration of his purr. A wave of emotion washed over him, a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He thought of Michael, of his love for animals, of the gift he had left behind. "You're a good boy, Sonny," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "A very good boy." Shadow, lying at his feet, thumped her tail against the floor as if acknowledging his words. Walter smiled, a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. He felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, a spark of hope that had been dormant for too long. He was still grieving, still missing Michael with every fiber of his being, but he was no longer completely alone. He had these two creatures, these two furry companions, to share his life with, to remind him that even in the darkest of times, there was still love, still connection, still the possibility of healing. The following weeks settled into a comfortable, predictable routine. Walter found that the structure of caring for Sonny and Shadow gave his days a purpose, a rhythm that had been missing since Michael's death. The emptiness of the house was still there, but it was no longer quite so oppressive. The silence was punctuated by the soft patting of paws, the gentle clinking of food bowls, the occasional bark or meow. He woke early each morning before the sun rose to the sound of Shadow's gentle nudging against his bedroom door. He would let her out into the backyard, then prepare their breakfast, kibble for Shadow, a mixture of wet and dry food for Sonny. Sonny would usually be waiting for him in the kitchen, perched on the windowsill, watching the birds flitting about in the garden. After breakfast, Walter would take Shadow for a walk around the neighborhood. He had always enjoyed walking, but he hadn't done it much since Michael's death. Now, with Shadow trotting happily beside him, he rediscovered the simple pleasure of fresh air, the changing seasons, the familiar sights of his neighborhood. He even started to exchange greetings with other dog walkers, brief, friendly encounters that eased his sense of isolation. The rest of the day was filled with small, everyday tasks. He would clean the litter boxes, groom Shadow's fur, play with Sonny using a feather wand or a laser pointer. He would read, listen to music, and occasionally attempt to work on some of his old research projects, though his concentration was often broken by the demands of his furry companions. He discovered that Sonny had a particular fondness for sitting on his lap while he read, purring contentedly as Walter stroked his fur. Shadow, on the other hand, preferred to lie at his feet, her head resting on his slippers. These small moments of physical contact, of shared warmth and companionship, were incredibly comforting to Walter. They filled a void he hadn't even realized was there, a need for touch, for connection, that had been starved for too long. He also started to take them to the vet regularly for checkups and vaccinations. Dr. Evans was pleased with their progress, both physically and emotionally. He commented on how well adjusted they seemed and how much Walter had clearly bonded with him. "They're lucky to have you, Mr. Peterson," he said one day after examining Sonny. "And I think in a way, you're lucky to have them too." Walter couldn't disagree. He had initially resisted the idea of taking them in, fearing the responsibility and the emotional burden. But now, he couldn't imagine his life without them. They had brought a sense of purpose, of companionship, of life back into his empty house. He even started to talk to Michael again, not just in his head, but out loud, as he went about his daily routine with Sonny and Shadow. He would tell him about their antics, their quirks, their small victories. He would imagine Michael laughing at Sonny's obsession with chasing dust bunnies, or shaking his head at Shadow's habit of burying her toys in the garden. One evening, as he was preparing dinner, he found himself telling Michael about a funny incident that had happened at the park that day. Shadow had chased a squirrel up a tree, then barked furiously at it for a good 10 minutes, refusing to give up. "You would have loved it, Michael," he said, smiling. "She's a real character, that one." He paused, a sudden wave of sadness washing over him. He missed Michael so much, the pain still raw and intense. But as he looked at Sonny, curled up on the kitchen counter, watching him with his wise green eyes, and Shadow lying patiently by the door, waiting for her evening walk, he felt a sense of gratitude, of acceptance. He knew he would never get over Michael's death. The grief would always be there, a part of him. But he was learning to live with it, to carry it with him. without letting it consume him. Sonny and Shadow had helped him find a way forward, a path through the darkness. They were a reminder that even in the face of loss, there was still love, still joy, still the possibility of finding meaning and purpose in life. They were, in a very real sense, Michael's last gift to him, a gift that kept on giving day after day. It was a seemingly insignificant object that triggered the avalanche. Walter was cleaning out the attic, a task he had been putting off for years. The attic was a repository of forgotten memories, a dusty, dimly lit space filled with boxes, old furniture, and the detritus of a life lived. He hadn't ventured up there since Michael's death. The thought of confronting the past too painful to bear. But with Sonny and Shadow now a constant presence in his life, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to declutter, to organize, to make the house feel more like a home again. He had started slowly, tackling one room at a time, and now he was finally ready to face the attic. He climbed the narrow staircase, his steps creaking on the wooden treads. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mothballs. Sunlight streamed through a small, grimy window, illuminating cobwebs and forgotten treasures. He began to sort through the boxes, his heart heavy with nostalgia. He found old photographs, school projects, childhood toys, each object a poignant reminder of Michael's life, of the years they had shared together. He came across a box labeled Michael's Sports Equipment. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the lid. He knew what was inside: Michael's baseball glove, his basketball, his soccer cleats. He hadn't been able to bring himself to look at these things since the accident. He took a deep breath and opened the box. The smell of leather and grass filled his nostrils, instantly transporting him back to Michael's Little League games, to the sunny afternoon spent practicing in the backyard, to the sound of Michael's laughter, his shouts of excitement. He picked up the baseball glove, the leather worn and softened by years of use. He ran his fingers over the stitching, feeling the familiar contours, the imprint of Michael's hand. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could almost feel Michael beside him, his arm around his shoulder, his voice teasing him about his rusty throwing skills. A wave of grief washed over him, so intense, so overwhelming, that he had to sit down on a dusty trunk. He clutched the glove to his chest, his body shaken with sobs. The memories came flooding back, a torrent of images, sounds, emotions. He saw Michael as a baby, his tiny hand gripping his finger. He saw him learning to ride a bike, his face beaming with pride. He saw him graduating from high school, his eyes shining with hope and ambition. He saw him packing his bags for college, his voice filled with excitement and a touch of nervousness. And then the final image, the one that haunted his nightmares, the phone call, the hospital, the doctor's grim face, the empty, silent room. He wept for a long time, the tears streaming down his face, soaking the old baseball glove. He wept for the lost years, for the unfulfilled dreams, for the future that had been stolen from them. He wept for the pain, the loneliness, the emptiness that had consumed him for so long. Sonny, who had followed him up to the attic, nudged his hand with his head, purring softly. Shadow, sensing his distress, whined and licked his face. Their presence was a comfort, a grounding force in the midst of his emotional storm. He looked at them, his eyes blurred with tears. He stroked Sonny's fur, feeling the warmth of his small body. He hugged Shadow, burying his face in her soft fur. They were there for him, always there, offering their silent, unconditional love. He didn't know how long he sat there, lost in his grief, but gradually the intensity of his emotions began to subside. The tears slowed, the sobs quieted. He felt drained, exhausted, but also somehow lighter. He had faced the past, the memories, the pain. He had allowed himself to feel the full force of his grief without holding back, without trying to escape. And he had survived. He stood up, his legs shaky. He put the baseball glove back in the box, along with the other sports equipment. He closed the lid, sealing away the memories, not to forget them, but to protect them, to keep them safe. He knew that the grief would never completely disappear. It would always be a part of him, a shadow lurking in the corners of his heart. But he also knew that he could live with it, that he could find joy, find meaning, find purpose, even in the face of loss. He looked at Sunny and Shadow, their eyes watching him with concern. He smiled, a weak, watery smile, but a genuine one nonetheless. "It's okay," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm okay. We're okay." He walked down the stairs, leaving the attic behind, leaving the past behind. He had a future to look forward to, a future with Sunny and Shadow, a future filled with the simple pleasures of companionship, of love, of life. He had a legacy to uphold, Michael's legacy, a legacy of kindness, of compassion, of caring for others, and he would do his best to honor that legacy every single day. The emotional upheaval in the attic marked a turning point for Walter. It was as if the floodgates of his grief had finally opened, releasing the pent-up pain and allowing him to begin the slow, gradual process of healing. He still missed Michael terribly, but the sharp, agonizing edges of his grief had softened, replaced by a duller, more manageable ache. He found himself thinking about Michael more often, not with the same crippling sadness, but with a sense of fondness, of gratitude for the years they had shared. He started to share stories about Michael with Sunny and Shadow, telling them about his son's childhood, his dreams, his quirky personality. He even started to talk to Michael directly, as if he were still there, listening. He also began to engage more with the outside world. He had become a regular at the local dog park, where he chatted with other dog owners, sharing stories and advice. He even made a few friends, people he could relate to, people who understood the joys and challenges of pet ownership. He discovered that the shared experience of caring for animals created a bond, a sense of community that he had been missing for so long. One day, he ran into Sarah Miller, the woman from the hospital who had initially contacted him about Sunny and Shadow. She was walking her own dog, a small fluffy terrier, in the park. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her face lighting up with recognition. "It's so good to see you, and these must be Sunny and Shadow." Walter smiled. "Yes, they are, and they're doing wonderfully. Thank you, Sarah, for everything." "Oh, it was nothing," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm just so glad it worked out. They look happy, and you look happier too." "I am," Walter said, surprised by the truth of his own words. "I am happier. They've changed my life." They talked for a while, sharing stories about their pets. Sarah told him about her work at the hospital, about the challenges and rewards of connecting animals with loving homes. Walter, in turn, told her about Michael, about his love for animals, about the legacy he had left behind. As they parted ways, Sarah said something that stayed with Walter. "You know, Mr. Peterson, sometimes the greatest gifts come to us in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes the things we think will break us end up making us stronger." Her words resonated deeply with Walter. He had thought that taking in Sonny and Shadow would be too much for him, that it would only deepen his grief. But instead, it had done the opposite. It had given him a reason to get out of bed in the morning, a reason to smile, a reason to connect with the world again. He started to volunteer at the animal shelter, the same one where Michael had adopted Sonny and Shadow. He helped with cleaning, feeding, and socializing the animals. He found a sense of purpose in caring for these creatures, in giving them the love and attention they deserved. He saw a reflection of Michael in every animal he helped, a reminder of his son's kind heart and compassionate spirit. He also started a small memorial garden for Michael in his backyard. He planted roses, Michael's favorite flower, and a small Japanese maple tree, a symbol of peace and tranquility. He placed a bench in the garden where he could sit and talk to Michael, surrounded by the beauty of nature. He realized that he was no longer just surviving, he was living. He was finding joy in the simple things: a sunny day, a wagging tail, a soft purr. He was connecting with others, building relationships, making a difference in the world. He was honoring Michael's memory, not by dwelling on the past, but by embracing the present and looking forward to the future. He had accepted his grief, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a companion to be carried with him. He had learned that love endures even in the face of loss. And he had discovered that the greatest gifts often come disguised as challenges, as opportunities for growth, for healing, for finding a deeper meaning in life. Years passed. Sonny and Shadow, no longer the young, energetic animals they once were, had settled into a comfortable middle age. Sonny, his ginger fur now streaked with white, spent most of his days napping in sunbeams, his purr a constant soothing presence in the house. Shadow, her muzzle gray and her gait a little slower, still enjoyed her daily walks, though they were shorter and less adventurous than before. Walter, too, had aged. His hair was completely white, his steps were slower, and his body ached more often. But his eyes still held a spark of life, a warmth that had been absent for so long. He had found a measure of peace, a contentment that had eluded him for years. He continued to volunteer at the animal shelter, his dedication unwavering. He had become a mentor to younger volunteers, sharing his wisdom, his experience, and his unwavering belief in the power of animal companionship. He was known for his gentle nature, his patience, and his ability to connect with even the most frightened or traumatized animals. He had also become a regular speaker at local schools and community groups, sharing his story, Michael's story, and the story of Sonny and Shadow. He talked about the importance of animal adoption, the healing power of pets, and the enduring nature of love and loss. He found that sharing his story not only helped him, but also inspired the audiences. He found a comfort and purpose by speaking out. One day, he received a letter from a young woman who had heard him speak at her high school several years earlier. She wrote that his story had inspired her to become a veterinarian and that she was now working at an animal shelter in another state. She thanked him for sharing his experience, for showing her that even in the face of heartbreak, it was possible to find hope and healing. Walter was deeply moved by the letter. He realized that Michael's legacy extended far beyond his own life, far beyond the walls of his home. His son's love for animals, his kindness, his compassion had touched the lives of others, inspiring them to make a difference in the world. He sat in his garden, surrounded by the roses he had planted in Michael's memory, Sonny asleep on his lap, Shadow lying at his feet. He looked around at the beauty of the garden, at the peacefulness of the setting, and he felt a sense of gratitude, of completion. He had lived a long and full life, a life marked by both joy and sorrow. He had loved deeply, and he had lost tragically. But he had also found healing and purpose and a renewed sense of connection to the world. He knew that his time was drawing near. He had made peace with that knowledge. He had no regrets. He had lived his life to the fullest, honoring the memory of his son and making a positive impact on the lives of others. He looked down at Sonny, then Shadow, stroking their fur gently. They were old, yes. He knew they didn't have much longer, but they gave his life the reason. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the Japanese maple tree. He thought of Michael, of his smile, his laughter, his love. He imagined him waiting for him, somewhere beyond the veil, surrounded by animals, his heart filled with joy. Walter smiled. He was ready. He had found peace, and he knew that love, in all its forms, endures forever. He understood he would never get over the death, but he learned how to live. He was ready. He had found peace, and he knew that love, in all its forms, endures forever. He understood he would never get over the death of his only son, but he had learned how to live, how to move forward while still holding the memory of Michael close to his heart. Sonny and Shadow had been instrumental in that journey, a living testament to the enduring power of love and connection. One crisp autumn morning, Walter woke to find Shadow unusually still. She was lying in her bed, her breathing shallow and labored. He knelt beside her, stroking her soft fur, his heart heavy with a familiar ache. He knew. He had seen this before with other pets, other loved ones. It was her time. He called Dr. Evans, who came to the house. After a gentle examination, he confirmed what Walter already knew. Shadow was failing. There was nothing to be done except to make her comfortable. Walter sat with Shadow for hours, holding her close, talking to her softly, telling her how much he loved her, how much she had meant to him. Sonny, sensing the gravity of the situation, stayed nearby, his green eyes filled with a knowing sadness. As the sun began to set, Shadow took a final peaceful breath and slipped away. Walter held her for a long time after she was gone, tears streaming down his face. He felt a profound sense of loss, but also a deep gratitude for the years of companionship, the unconditional love that Shadow had given him. He buried her in the garden, next to the Japanese maple tree, under a small stone marker he had carved himself. Shadow, beloved friend, Michael's gift. Sonny, now alone for the first time in years, seemed to sense the loss deeply. He moped around the house, searching for Shadow, his meows plaintive and mournful. Walter did his best to comfort him, spending extra time with him, stroking his fur, talking to him softly. But Sonny, too, was old, and the loss of Shadow seemed to accelerate his own decline. He ate less, slept more, and his once vibrant ginger fur became dull and lifeless. Walter knew that Sonny's time was also drawing near. He made sure Sonny was as comfortable as possible, providing him with soft blankets, warm spots in the sun, and plenty of love and attention. He talked to him constantly, telling him stories about Michael, about Shadow, about their life together. One morning, Walter found Sonny curled up in his favorite spot, on the armchair where Michael used to sit. He was still, peaceful, his eyes closed. He had passed away in his sleep. Walter buried Sonny next to Shadow under a matching stone marker. Sonny, beloved friend, Michael's light. He stood there in the garden, surrounded by the graves of his beloved pets, the memory of his son, and the quiet beauty of nature. He felt a profound sense of loss, a deep ache in his heart. But he also felt a sense of peace, of acceptance, of gratitude. He had loved and lost, and he had learned to live again. He had found healing and purpose in the most unexpected places. He had honored Michael's memory, not by dwelling on the past, but by embracing the present and making a difference in the world. He knew he didn't have much time left himself. He was old, tired, and his body was failing, but he was ready. He had lived a full life, a life filled with love, loss, and ultimately redemption. He continued to volunteer at the animal shelter as long as his health allowed. He shared his story with anyone who would listen, spreading the message of hope, healing, and the enduring power of animal companionship. He became a living testament to the transformative power of love, a beacon of light in a world often filled with darkness. One day, while walking home from the shelter, Walter felt a sharp pain in his chest. He collapsed on the sidewalk, his vision blurring. He knew this was it. He closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. He saw Michael standing before him, his hand outstretched, his eyes shining with love. He saw Sonny and Shadow running towards him, their tails wagging, their barks filled with joy. He reached out his hand, and Michael took it. He felt a sense of peace, of completion, of coming home. He was no longer afraid. He was surrounded by love, bathed in light, and reunited with those he had lost. Walter Peterson died peacefully on a sunny afternoon, surrounded by the invisible presence of his loved ones, his heart filled with gratitude, his soul finally at rest. His legacy lived on, not just in the memories of those who knew him, but in the countless lives he had touched, both human and animal, through his kindness, his compassion, and his unwavering belief in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The small house in Maryland, once a symbol of loss and emptiness, became a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, it is possible to find hope, healing, and a renewed sense of purpose. The garden, with its blooming roses and the peaceful shade of the Japanese maple, became a sanctuary, a place of remembrance, a testament to the enduring bonds of love that connect us all, even beyond the boundaries of life and death.